The restaurant went deadly silent as the Vampire King's son hid under a table, shaking with fear. Everyone else looked away, terrified that the boy's distress would summon his lethal father. But a poor waitress ignored the danger. She walked straight to the forbidden table, got on her knees, and held the child's hand when no one else would. What happened next shocked the entire city. The Vampire King stormed in, saw his son clinging to her, and looked at the manager with terrifying calm. "She's done working for you. She belongs to us now." Ilara wiped her hands on her apron, the rough fabric scratching against skin already chapped from hours of washing dishes in the back. The manager, Mr. Henderson, stood by the swinging kitchen doors, his face drained of all color, looking as though he might faint. He was a man who usually thrived on the chaos of the dinner rush, barking orders and rearranging seating charts with military precision, but now he looked like a ghost. "What's going on?" Ilara whispered, stepping up beside him. "Why has the floor gone quiet?" "Don't look," Henderson hissed, his voice trembling. "Just go back to the kitchen, Ilara. We aren't serving table 4. We aren't going anywhere near table 4. Ilara frowned, her curiosity overriding her exhaustion. She leaned past him, her eyes scanning the dining room. It was a high-end establishment, the kind where the lighting was dim and the tablecloths were starched stiff, but the atmosphere was usually warm, filled with the hum of conversation and the clink of glasses. Now, the air felt thin, cold, like the pressure drop before a thunderstorm. Then she saw it. The tablecloth at table 4 was twitching. "It's just a kid," Ilara said, her brow furrowing. "Someone lost their child." "That is not just a child," Henderson grabbed her arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "That is the fledgling. The scion. If he is here, he is coming. And if the boy is upset." Henderson swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "If the boy cries, things shatter. People bleed." Ilara pulled her arm away. She didn't know much about the supernatural politics that governed the city. She was too busy working double shifts just to pay rent on her studio apartment, but she knew what fear looked like. She had grown up in a house where the sound of heavy footsteps meant she had to hide in the closet, holding her breath until her lungs burned. She knew exactly what it felt like to be small, terrified, and alone in a room full of people who were pretending not to see you. "He's terrified," Ilara said softly, more to herself than the manager. "He's dangerous," Henderson countered. "He's a child." Before Henderson could stop her, Ilara grabbed a basket of warm bread rolls and a small glass of milk from the service station. She didn't rush. She moved with a deliberate, calm slowness, weaving through the frozen tables. She could feel the eyes of the customers on her, heavy with judgment and panic. A woman in pearls looked at her as if she were walking toward a live grenade. Ilara reached table 4 and stopped. She didn't loom over the table. Instead, she did the one thing no one else had dared to do. She got on her knees. The floor was hard against her tired legs, but she ignored it. She set the basket and the milk down on the carpet and lifted the edge of the heavy velvet tablecloth. 2 glowing eyes, the color of bruised violets, stared back at her from the darkness. The boy was pale, his skin possessing a translucence that made him look like he was carved from marble. He was dressed in a miniature suit that cost more than Ilara made in a year, but his tie was crooked, and his cheeks were wet with silver tears. He flinched when the light hit him, pressing himself further against the table leg. "Hey there," Ilara whispered. Her voice was low, devoid of the fear that saturated the rest of the room. "It's pretty loud out there, isn't it? I don't blame you for hiding. I wish I could hide under here sometimes, too." The boy didn't speak. He stared at her, his chest heaving with silent sobs. The air around him felt colder, like standing next to an open freezer. "My name is Ilara," she continued, keeping her hands visible, palms open. "I brought you some milk. It's warm. And a roll. They're really good when they're fresh." The boy's gaze flickered to the food, then back to her face. He was searching for something: fear, disgust, anger. He found none of it. "Go away," the boy whispered. His voice sounded like cracking ice. "My father will be angry if I'm not perfect." "Nobody is perfect," Ilara said, a sad smile touching her lips. especially not in a restaurant. You should see the chef when he burns the risotto. The boy blinked. The tension in his small shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch. Are you afraid of me? He asked. Everyone is afraid. I'm not afraid, Alara lied. She was terrified, but not of him. She was terrified for him. You look like you need a friend, not an audience. She slowly extended her hand, palm up, resting it on the carpet between them. It was an invitation, not a demand. For a long moment, nothing happened. The restaurant remained deadly silent. Then, with a hesitant, trembling movement, the boy reached out. His hand was small, his fingers cold as winter frost. When his skin touched hers, a shockwave went through Alara, not of pain, but of profound, aching loneliness. It was an emotion so heavy it nearly knocked the breath out of her. She didn't pull away. She squeezed his hand gently. I've got you, she whispered. You're okay. The boy let out a shuddering breath, a sound that seemed to release the tension in the very air of the room. He scooted forward, moving out from the shadows of the table, still gripping her hand as if it were the only solid thing in a spinning world. Alara smiled at him, using her free hand to brush a stray lock of dark hair from his forehead. There you are. And then, the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees in a single second. The front doors of the restaurant blew open, not with a bang, but with a gust of wind that smelled of ozone, rain, and ancient dust. The candlelight at every table flickered and died, leaving the room illuminated only by the streetlights outside and the faint, ambient glow of the city. A figure stood in the doorway. He was tall, impossibly so, with broad shoulders that filled the frame. He wore a long coat of charcoal wool that seemed to absorb the light around him. His face was a mask of cold, sharp angles, beautiful and terrifying, like a statue carved by a master artist who had forgotten how to smile. His eyes were the same violet as the boy's, but where the child's were soft with fear, the man's were hard, burning with a controlled, ancient fury. Lord Valerius, the vampire king of the Eastern Coven. He took a step forward, and the sound of his boot on the floorboards echoed like a gunshot. The manager whimpered audibly from the kitchen doorway. Valerius's eyes swept the room, dissecting every threat, every heartbeat, until they landed on table 4. He saw his son, sitting on the floor. And then he saw the waitress. Alara felt the weight of his gaze like a physical touch. It was heavy, pressing against her chest, demanding submission. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage, but she didn't let go of the boy's hand. In fact, she held it tighter. Valerius froze. He had expected to find his son in hysterics. He had expected to find the staff cowering, the patrons fleeing. He had not expected to find a human woman in a grease-stained apron, kneeling on the floor, holding his son's hand while the boy looked at her with an expression Valerius hadn't seen in years. Trust. The vampire king moved. He didn't walk, he blurred, crossing the distance from the door to the table in a heartbeat. One moment he was at the entrance, the next he was towering over Alara. Leo, Valerius said. His voice was deep, a resonant baritone that vibrated in Alara's bones. It wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of centuries of command. The boy, Leo, looked up. He flinched, instinctively moving closer to Alara. Valerius's eyes narrowed, a flash of pain crossing his features so quickly Alara almost missed it. He looked at Alara, his gaze shifting from the boy to her face. You, he said. Let go of him. Alara looked up at the most powerful predator in the city. Her instincts screamed at her to run, to grovel, to beg for mercy. But she felt the boy's hand trembling in hers, the way his small fingers dug into her palm. He's scared, Alara said. Her voice shook, but she didn't look away. He's not hurting anyone. He's just scared. The silence that followed was deafening. Mr. Henderson had covered his eyes. Valerius stared at her. He looked at her cheap uniform, her messy bun, the dark circles under her eyes. Then he looked at her hand, still firmly clasping his son's. He is calm, Valerius murmured, almost to himself. He is never calm in crowds. He needed to know he wasn't alone, Alara said quietly. Leo tugged on Alara's hand. Father, the boy whispered, his voice small. She gave me milk. She likes the burnt risotto. Valerius blinked. The terrifying intensity in his eyes softened, just a fraction, replaced by a profound confusion. He crouched down, his movements fluid and graceful, until he was eye level with Alara. Up close, she could see the inhuman perfection of his skin, the way his pupils were vertical slits that were slowly dilating to roundness. "What is your name?" he asked. "Alara," she whispered. "Alara," he tested the name, the sound rolling off his tongue. "You have done something impossible, Alara." He reached out toward his son. "Leo, come. We must leave." Leo hesitated. He looked at his father, then at Alara. "Can she come?" Valerius stiffened. "She has work, Leo. She belongs here." "No," Leo said, his voice rising in pitch, the panic returning. The lights in the restaurant flickered ominously. "No, I don't want to go alone. The shadows are too loud in the car. Please." The glasses on the table began to vibrate. Valerius looked at the rattling silverware, then back at Alara. He saw the way his son was anchoring himself to this human woman. He made a decision. He stood up, his height once again imposing. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a heavy gold clip filled with currency. He tossed it onto the table without looking. It was enough to buy the restaurant, let alone pay for the meal. "You are finished for the evening," Valerius said to Alara. It wasn't a question. "I can't just leave," Alara stammered, scrambling to her feet, though her legs felt like jelly. "I need this job. Mr. Henderson will fire me if I walk out in the middle of a shift." Valerius turned his gaze to the kitchen door where Henderson was peeking out. The vampire didn't say a word. He simply arched an eyebrow. Henderson threw the door open. "She's off. She's clocked out. Take the week. Take the month," he squeaked, before vanishing back into the safety of the kitchen. Valerius turned back to Alara. "Your employment is secure. Now, come. My son requires you." Alara started to protest, but Leo grabbed her other hand now, clinging to her apron. "Please," the boy whispered, looking up at her with those wide, violet eyes. "Please don't leave me." Something tugged in Alara's chest, a maternal instinct she hadn't known she possessed. She looked at the terrified boy, then at the imposing, yet strangely desperate father. She realized then that she had no real choice. Not because of the vampire's power, but because she couldn't leave the child. "Okay," she breathed. "Okay, I'm coming." The car was longer than Alara's entire apartment. The interior smelled of expensive leather and that same faint scent of ozone that clung to Valerius. The windows were tinted so darkly that the passing city lights were nothing but blurred streaks of amber and crimson. Leo had fallen asleep almost instantly the moment they were inside, his head resting heavily on Alara's lap. She sat rigid, her back pressed against the plush seat, afraid to move. Valerius sat opposite them, watching. He hadn't spoken since they left the restaurant. He sat with a stillness that was unnatural, his hands resting on his knees, his gaze fixed on Alara's hand, which was absent-mindedly stroking Leo's hair. "He hasn't slept in a vehicle in 3 years," Valerius said suddenly. His voice was low, cutting through the hum of the engine. Alara jumped slightly, her hand freezing on the boy's head. "He was exhausted," she said. "Fear takes a lot out of you." "It does," Valerius agreed. "And yet, you seem to function despite it." Alara met his gaze. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "I'm in a car with the Vampire King, going to God knows where. My hands are shaking." Valerius looked at her hands. They were indeed trembling slightly. "And yet, you knelt. You spoke to him. You touched him." He leaned forward slightly, the shadows in the car seeming to bend toward him. "Why?" "Because he was crying," Alara said simply. "And no one else was doing anything." Valerius studied her face, as if trying to decipher a complex code written in her features. "Humans usually run from us. Or they scream. Or they try to bargain. You did none of those things." "I didn't know who he was at first," Alara said. "But you know now. And you are still here." "He asked me to stay," she said, looking down at the sleeping boy. "He's just a kid. I don't care if he's a vampire prince or a pauper. He's a kid who's scared of the dark." "He is not scared of the dark," Valerius corrected gently. "He is scared of what lives in it." As he should be. There was a weight to those words, a history that Alara didn't understand but could feel. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Blackwood Manor," Valerius said. "My home. You will remain there until he wakes. Then, my driver will return you to your residence." Alara nodded, looking out the window. They were leaving the city center, heading toward the cliffs that overlooked the ocean. The houses here were gated estates, fortresses of wealth and privacy. "What happened to him?" Alara asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. "To make him so afraid?" Valerius stiffened. The temperature in the car dropped again. "That is not your concern." "It is if you expect me to keep him calm," Alara shot back, surprising herself with her boldness. "I can't help him if I don't know what he's fighting." Valerius looked at her, his eyes flashing with a mix of irritation and respect. "He saw his mother die," he said, the words cold and sharp like shards of glass. 2 years ago. She was taken. Violently. He was there. He has not spoken to a stranger since. Until tonight." Alara felt a cold not form in her stomach. She looked down at the sleeping face, the innocence masked by exhaustion. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Sympathy is useless," Valerius said, leaning back into the shadows. "Protection is what matters." The car slowed, turning through a massive set of iron gates that groaned as they swung open. A winding driveway lined with ancient oak trees led up to a sprawling stone manor that looked more like a fortress than a home. Gargoyles perched on the eaves, their stone eyes watching the car approach. As the car came to a halt, the driver's door opened, and a uniformed man hurried to open the back. Valerius stepped out first, extending a hand not to help Alara, but to wait. "Do not wake him," Valerius commanded. "Carry him." I don't think I can carry him all the way in," Alara said. "He's heavy." Valerius paused. He looked at her slender frame, then at his son. "I will take him." He reached into the car. But the moment his hands touched Leo, the boy whimpered in his sleep, his small hands clutching Alara's apron tighter. "No." "Alara." Valerius froze. He withdrew his hands, his expression unreadable. "It seems," Valerius said, his voice tight, "that you must carry him." "I will assist." He placed a hand on Alara's elbow. The touch was electric, cold yet burning. He guided her out of the car, helping her bear the weight of the sleeping boy. They walked up the stone steps to the massive double doors. They swung open before they even reached them, revealing a grand foyer lit by crystal chandeliers that held real candles. A line of staff stood waiting, vampires all of them, their stillness unnerving. At the front of the line stood a man with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, holding a clipboard. He looked at Valerius, then at Alara, then at the sleeping boy. "My lord," the man said, his voice dry and skeptical. "You have brought a human into the inner sanctum." "Silas," Valerius acknowledged, not stopping. "She is with Leo." "With the scion?" Silas followed them, his footsteps silent on the marble floor. "Is that wise?" "The council will hear of this before dawn." "A human unvetted, handling the air? It presents a security risk of catastrophic proportions." "The boy is sleeping, Silas," Valerius said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming a low growl. "For the first time in months, he is sleeping without sedatives. If you wake him with your prattle about security risks, I will demonstrate what a true catastrophe looks like." Silas shut his mouth instantly, though his eyes narrowed behind his glasses as he glared at Alara. They reached a massive bedroom on the second floor. It was filled with toys, expensive, antique toys that looked like they had never been played with. A four-poster bed sat in the center. Alara gently lowered Leo onto the silk sheets. He stirred, his hand searching for hers. She sat on the edge of the bed, letting him hold her fingers until he settled again. Valerius stood by the fireplace, watching them. The firelight danced in his eyes, making them look like molten gold. "He will not let you leave," Valerius said quietly. "He has to eventually," Alara whispered. "I have a life. I have bills. I can pay your bills." "It's not just about money," Alara said. "I can't just belong to someone. I'm not a pet." Valerius turned to face her fully. "I am not looking for a pet, Alara. I have plenty of those in the kennels." He walked toward the bed, stopping just inches from her. She could smell the scent of him again, rain and old power. "My son is dying," Valerius said, the vulnerability in his voice shocking her. "Not of a sickness of the body, but of the mind. He is fading, withering. Tonight, for the first time, he bloomed. Because of you." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a card. It was black with silver embossing. "I am offering you a position," he said. "Governess, guardian, companion. Call it what you will. You will live here. You will be protected. Your debts will be erased. Your family, if you have one, will be provided for." Alara looked at the card, then at the sleeping boy. "And if I refuse? Then you will walk out that door, and you will never see us again," Valerius said. "And I will go back to watching my son slowly fade away." It was a manipulation, and she knew it. But looking at Leo's tear-stained cheeks, she also knew it was the truth. Alara took a deep breath. She thought of her empty apartment, the stack of overdue notices on her counter, the loneliness of her own life. "I have conditions," she said. Valerius's lips quirked upward, the ghost of a smile. "I would expect nothing less." "Name them." "I get 1 day off a week. I can leave the grounds when I want. And—" She looked him straight in the eye, summoning every ounce of courage she had. "And you don't treat me like the help. If I'm taking care of him, you listen to me when it comes to what he needs." Silas, who had been lurking in the doorway, gasped. "Insolence." Valerius raised a hand, silencing his advisor. He looked at Alara, his gaze intense, assessing. "Agreed," Valerius said. He held out his hand. This time, he didn't wait for her to bow or curtsy. He offered it as an equal. Alara hesitated, then placed her hand in his. His skin was cool, hard, and terrifyingly strong. As his fingers closed around hers, sealing the pact, Alara felt a shiver run down her spine. She had the distinct feeling she had just walked willingly into the lion's den. But as she looked back at Leo, who was finally sleeping peacefully, she knew she would stay. "Welcome to Blackwood, Alara," Valerius said softly. Outside, thunder rolled, signaling the start of a storm. But inside the room, for the first time in years, it was quiet. The first morning at Blackwood Manor did not break with the chirping of birds or the warm slant of sunlight. It arrived like a bruise healing slow, dark, and heavy. Alara woke in a room that was larger than the entire restaurant she used to work in. The bed was an island of white linen in a sea of dark mahogany. For a moment, suspended between sleep and wakefulness, she reached for her alarm clock, the cheap plastic one that rattled on her nightstand back home. Her hand met only cool, polished wood. Memory flooded back like ice water. The restaurant. The boy under the table. The violet eyes of the king. She sat up, pulling the duvet to her chin. Her old clothes, the grease-stained apron and jeans, were gone. In their place, draped over a velvet armchair, was a dress. It was modest, high-necked, made of a gray wool so fine it felt like water against her fingertips. Beside it lay a note on thick, cream-colored cardstock. "Breakfast is served in the solarium at 8 a.m. Do not be late. Silas." Alara dressed in silence. The house was quiet, but it wasn't empty. She could feel the hum of it, a low vibration in the floorboards that felt like the purring of a giant, sleeping cat. When she opened her bedroom door, the hallway was empty, lined with portraits of people who all shared Valerius's sharp jawline and predatory gaze. They seemed to watch her as she walked, their painted eyes tracking the intruder in their sanctuary. She found the solarium by following the smell of coffee, a distinct, human scent in a house that smelled of cold stone and ozone. The room was made entirely of glass, looking out over a garden that was gray with frost. At the center sat a round iron table. Valerius was there, reading a newspaper that looked to be printed on parchment. Leo sat opposite him, staring at a goblet filled with a thick, crimson liquid. The boy looked smaller than he had the night before, his shoulders hunched as if expecting a blow. Silas stood by the sideboard, his arms crossed, watching the boy with the scrutiny of a scientist observing a failing experiment. "Drink, Leo," Valerius said, not looking up from his paper. His voice was calm, but there was a razor-thin edge to it. "You need your strength." Leo shook his head, his hands gripping the edge of the table until his knuckles turned white. "I can't," he whispered. It smells like her." Valerius lowered the paper. His expression was unreadable, a mask of marble. "Like whom?" "Mother," Leo breathed. The silence that followed was so absolute it made Alara's ears ring. Valerius flinched, a microscopic tightening of the muscles around his eyes. Silas scoffed, a sharp, dismissive sound. "The boy is projecting," Silas said coldly. "He requires sustenance. If he does not feed, his control will slip. We cannot afford another incident." Alara stepped into the room. "Good morning." 3 pairs of eyes snapped to her. Valerius's gaze was assessing, Silas's was hostile, and Leo's was filled with desperate relief. "Alara." Leo scrambled off his chair and ran to her, burying his face in the gray wool of her skirt. He was trembling again. Valerius watched the interaction, his eyes narrowing. "He has not eaten. Maybe he doesn't want that." Alara gestured to the goblet, trying not to look too closely at the contents. "He is a vampire, Ms. Vance," Silas sneered. "He does not eat toast and jam. He drinks blood. It is his nature." "He's a child," Alara countered, her hand resting protectively on Leo's head. "And right now he's associating that cup with trauma. You're trying to force him to drink something that reminds him of his mother's death. No wonder he's starving himself." Silas bristled, his fangs lengthening slightly. "You dare lecture us on our biology?" "I'm lecturing you on psychology," Alara said, her heart hammering against her ribs, but her voice steady. She looked at Valerius. "Does he eat anything else?" "Anything at all." Valerius looked at his son, who was clinging to Alara's leg like a lifeline. "He can consume solid food, but it provides no nourishment. Only comfort." "Then let him have comfort first," Alara said. "Let him calm down. Then maybe he'll drink." Valerius stared at her for a long beat. The air in the room grew heavy, the pressure dropping. Then he nodded once. "Silas, bring the boy fruit. And bread." "My lord." "Do it." The command was soft, but it hit the room like a whip crack. Silas bowed stiffly and vanished into the kitchen. Alara sat down next to Leo's chair, gently prying him off her leg. "Come on, Leo. Sit. I'll eat with you." For the next 20 minutes, the solarium was filled with the crunch of toast and the soft murmur of Alara's voice. She talked about nothing important, the weather, the strange gargoyles on the roof, the size of the library she hoped to see. She ignored the vampire king sitting 3 feet away, though she could feel his gaze burning into the side of her face. When Silas returned with a plate of sliced apples and warm bread, Leo ate voraciously. And when he was finished, without anyone asking, he reached for the goblet. He didn't drink it all, but he took a few sips, grimacing but swallowing. Valerius watched it all, his newspaper forgotten. When Leo finished, the king stood up. "Miss Vance," he said, "walk with me." The gardens of Blackwood Manor were a labyrinth of high hedges and frozen fountains. The air was frigid, but Valerius walked without a coat, the cold seemingly unable to touch him. Alara shivered in her wool dress, wrapping her arms around herself. "You undermine my advisor," Valerius said. He didn't look at her. He watched the gray horizon. "Your advisor was torturing your son," Alara replied, her teeth chattering slightly. "Silas is practical. Leo's hunger is dangerous. If a fledgling does not feed, the hunger takes over the mind. He becomes a feral thing. A beast." Valerius stopped and turned to her. "You are safe here, Alara, only as long as Leo is rational. If he turns feral, he will not see you as a friend. He will see you as food." The bluntness of the statement hit her hard. "He wouldn't." "He is a predator," Valerius said, stepping closer. He blocked the wind, his large frame radiating a strange, dry heat. "We all are. Do not forget that. You are a sheep living in a den of wolves because the cub likes your wool. Is that all I am to you?" Alara asked, looking up at him. "Sheep's wool." Valerius looked down at her. His eyes, ancient and weary, searched her face. "You are an anomaly. You have no magic. You have no lineage. You reek of mortality and fragility. And yet, He reached out, his hand hovering near her face before dropping to his side. And yet, you make the air around you still. My son has been screaming inside his own head for 2 years. When you are near, the screaming stops. He just needs to feel safe, Alara said. He needs to know he's not a monster. But he is a monster, Valerius said, his voice laced with self-loathing. He is my son. Being a vampire doesn't make him a monster, Alara argued. Choices make you a monster. Valerius laughed, a short, bitter sound. You speak with the confidence of someone who has never seen war. Who has never seen what we do when the thirst takes us. He turned and began walking again. There is a council meeting tonight. The high lords of the territory are coming. They're coming to see Leo. Alara hurried to catch up. Why? Because they smell blood in the water, Valerius said grimly. They know the boy is unstable. They believe he is unfit to inherit. If they deem him a threat to the masquerade, to our secrecy, they will demand his execution. Alara stopped dead on the gravel path. They want to kill a child? They want to prune a rotten branch before it kills the tree, Valerius corrected. They are afraid. Leo's power, it is not normal. Even for us. What do you mean? Valerius stopped by a stone fountain. The water inside was frozen solid, trapped in mid-spray. Leo does not just drink blood. He absorbs energy, emotion, life force. He does it unconsciously. That is why he felt your calmness in the restaurant. He drank it. Alara looked at her hands. That explained the shockwave she had felt when they touched the profound sense of loneliness. He hadn't just been holding her hand, he had been siphoning her stability. Tonight, Valerius said, turning to face her, his expression intense. You will bring him to the main hall. You will stand with him. You will keep him calm. If he cries, if he lashes out, if he shows even a flicker of uncontrolled magic, the council will vote. And I cannot fight all of them alone. You want me to be his shield, Alara realized. I want you to be his anchor, Valerius said. Do not let him drift. The rest of the day was a blur of preparation. Alara spent every hour with Leo, playing simple card games, reading stories, doing anything to keep his mind occupied. She learned quickly that Leo was brilliant. He spoke 3 languages and understood complex mathematics, but emotionally, he was shattered. He jumped at shadows. He flinched if a door slammed. As the sun began to set, casting long, bloody shadows across the floor of the nursery, the atmosphere in the manor changed. The air grew thick and electric. The servants moved faster, their heads bowed low. Alara helped Leo dress in a formal velvet suit. He looked like a porcelain doll, beautiful and breakable. I don't want to go down there, Leo whispered, fiddling with his cuffs. Lord Malachi will be there. He hates me. Why does he hate you? Alara asked, kneeling to straighten his tie. Because he wanted father to marry his daughter, Leo said matter-of-factly. And because I can do this. Leo looked at a vase of white roses on the table. He didn't touch them. He just stared. Suddenly, the roses turned gray. Then black. Then, they crumbled into dust, collapsing into a pile of ash on the mahogany surface. Alara stared at the pile of ash. Her heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just freezing or breaking, it was instant entropy. Decay. I didn't mean to. Leo cried, his eyes filling with tears. I just got nervous. It's okay, Alara said quickly, though her own hands were shaking. She grabbed a cloth and swept the ash into a bin, hiding the evidence. It's okay. We won't look at the flowers downstairs, okay? Look at me. Just look at me. Leo nodded, taking her hand. His grip was iron-tight. A knock came at the door. Silas entered, dressed in formal robes. It is time, he announced ominously. The great hall was a cavernous space lit by 1,000 floating candles. A long table dominated the room, seated with 12 figures who radiated power like heat from a furnace. Alara walked in, holding Leo's hand. She felt the weight of 24 ancient eyes land on her. She was the only human in the room. She felt like a mouse walking into a convention of vipers. Valerius sat at the head of the table on a high-backed throne carved from obsidian. He looked regal, terrifying, and utterly distant. He did not smile when they entered. The scion approaches, Silas announced. Leo walked forward, pulling Alara with him. "Stop," a voice boomed. A man halfway down the table stood up. He was massive, with a mane of red hair and a beard braided with gold rings. "Lord Malachi. Why is the livestock in the chamber?" Malachi pointed a thick finger at Alara. "She is his governess," Valerius said, his voice bored. "She is a human," Malachi spat. "She has no place here. Remove her." "She stays," Leo said. The room went silent. It was the first time the boy had spoken. His voice was small, high-pitched, but clear. Malachi laughed. "The whelp speaks. Hiding behind a skirt? Is this the future of our coven? A boy who needs a human nursemaid to keep him from wetting himself." "Watch your tongue," Malachi Valerius warned, the shadows in the corners of the room stretching and sharpening into spikes. "I speak the truth," Malachi roared, slamming his fist on the table. "The boy is broken. He is a danger to us all. Remember the incident in Prague? Remember the destruction?" Leo flinched, stepping back. Alara felt the surge of energy in his hand, cold, erratic, terrified. The candles overhead flared, the flames turning blue. "He is losing control," a woman at the table whispered. "Look at the lights. He will kill us all one day," Malachi shouted. "He must be put down." The energy in the room spiked. Alara could feel the static electricity raising the hair on her arms. Leo was breathing fast, his eyes glowing bright violet. He was about to break. If he unleashed that entropy she saw in the bedroom, Malachi would kill him. Alara didn't think. She acted. She dropped to her knees, right there on the stone floor, pulling Leo down with her so they were face to face, ignoring the council entirely. "Leo," she said firmly. "Look at my eyes." "They're loud," Leo gasped, clutching his head. "They're so loud, Alara. They want me dead." "I know," she whispered. "But I'm here. Listen to my voice." "What color were the flowers in the garden?" "What?" Leo blinked, confused by the mundane question. "The flowers. By the fountain. What color were they?" "Be blue," Leo stuttered. "Ice blue." "Good. And the fish in the pond?" "Orange." "Good." Alara placed her hands on his cheeks. "You are not in Prague. You are in your home. You are holding my hand. You are safe." The blue flames on the candles turned back to orange. The shaking in the floorboard stopped. Leo took a deep, shuddering breath and leaned his forehead against hers. "I'm okay," he whispered. Alara stood up, pulling Leo with her. She turned to face Malachi. The huge vampire was staring at her with his mouth slightly open. The rest of the council looked stunned. "He is not broken," Alara said, her voice ringing out in the silent hall. She was shaking, but she channeled her anger into her voice. "He is a child who has been surrounded by people waiting for him to fail. Of course he's afraid. You would be too." Malachi's face turned purple. "You insolent little." "Enough," Valerius said. The king stood up. He didn't shout, but his voice carried the weight of a mountain. He looked at Alara, a flicker of something new in his eyes. Not just curiosity. Pride. "The boy is calm," Valerius said. "The test was to see if he could maintain control under pressure. He has done so. With help," Malachi argued. "A king is allowed advisors," Valerius countered smoothly. "Alara is his. The matter is settled." Valerius descended from the dais and walked to them. He placed a hand on Leo's shoulder, then looked at Alara. "Take him upstairs," he said softly. Alara nodded, her knees weak with adrenaline. She turned to lead Leo out. As they reached the heavy oak doors, she heard Malachi's voice, low and venomous. "This isn't over, Valerius. If the human fails, if she slips up even once, we will take the boy. And we will drain her dry." Alara didn't look back. She walked out of the hall, her head high, holding the hand of the monster everyone feared. Later that night, Alara sat on the window seat in her room, staring out at the dark grounds. Leo was asleep, finally peaceful. There was a soft knock at her door. It wasn't locked. Valerius entered. He had shed his formal robes and was wearing a simple white shirt, unbuttoned at the collar. He looked tired. Immortality, it seemed, did not prevent exhaustion. "You made quite an impression," he said, leaning against the doorframe. I made enemies, Alara corrected. You made the right enemies, Valerius said. He walked into the room, stopping a few feet from her. Malachi has been looking for an excuse to challenge me for decades. You just took away his best weapon. Leo isn't a weapon, Alara said quietly. To them, he is. Valerius sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. You saved him tonight. Again. He saved himself, Alara said. I just reminded him how. Valerius looked at her, his gaze intense. Why do you do it? You owe us nothing. You could have run. I don't like bullies, Alara shrugged. And that room was full of them. Valerius chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that made Alara's stomach do a traitorous flip. You're a strange creature, Alara Vance. You stand before ancient killers and lecture them on manners. He moved closer. The air between them hummed with tension. It wasn't the terrified tension of the council room. It was something else. Magnetic. I need to understand something, Valerius said, his voice dropping to a whisper. When you touch him, you do not fear him, even when he decays the world around him. Why? Because fear makes it worse, Alara said. He feeds on emotion, right? If I'm scared, I'm just giving him fuel for the fire. If I'm calm, I'm water. Water, Valerius repeated. He looked at her hand, resting on her knee. Slowly, deliberately, he reached out and covered her hand with his. His skin was cool, but the heat underneath was undeniable. Alara's breath hitched. And what happens, Valerius whispered, when the fire meets the water? Steam, Alara breathed. Or the fire goes out. I do not want my fire to go out, Valerius murmured, his thumb tracing the line of her knuckles. But I have been cold for a very long time. He was close enough now that she could see the flecks of gold in his violet eyes. He leaned in, just an inch. Crash. Sound of shattering glass exploded from down the hall. From the nursery. Alara and Valerius pulled apart instantly. Leo, Valerius snarled, the tenderness vanishing, replaced by the predator. They ran. They burst into the nursery. The window was shattered, shards of glass glistening on the carpet. The curtains were billowing in the freezing wind. Leo was sitting up in bed, screaming. But he wasn't alone. A shadow, not a natural shadow, but a living, writhing darkness, was hovering over his bed. It had no face, only long, smoky tendrils that were wrapping around the boy's throat. Valerius didn't hesitate. He moved faster than thought, a blur of motion. He slammed into the shadow, his hands glowing with a white, searing light. The shadow shrieked, a sound like metal tearing, and dissolved into smoke, flowing out the broken window and into the night. Valerius stood by the window, his chest heaving, his hands still glowing. Alara rushed to the bed. Leo was gasping for air, red marks forming on his small neck. It tried to take me, Leo sobbed, clinging to Alara. It whispered to me. It said I belonged in the dark. Valerius turned from the window. His face was a mask of absolute fury. The look in his eyes was so terrifying that even Alara flinched. Malachi, Valerius said, the name a curse. He did not wait for the vote. He sent a shade. He walked to the bed, looking at the marks on his son's neck. Then he looked at Alara. This is war, Valerius said softly. The manor is no longer safe. We must leave. Leave? Alara asked, holding the sobbing boy. Go where? There is a safe house, Valerius said. In the mountains. Ancient ground. The shades cannot cross the threshold. He looked at Alara, and for the first time, she saw fear in him. Not for himself, but for them. Pack a bag, Alara, he commanded. We leave within the hour. And pray that the road is clear. The departure was a study in controlled chaos. There were no trunks, no leisurely selection of clothes. Valerius moved through the manor like a gale-force wind, stripping the armory of weapons, silver-inlaid daggers, vials of holy water, a paradox that confused Alara until she realized they were for his enemies, not him, and a long, curved sword that looked as if it had seen the Crusades. Alara packed a single duffel bag. She grabbed sweaters, thick socks, and Leo's favorite books. She hesitated over the picture of her own mother she kept in her wallet, the only family she had left, long gone, before tucking it deep into her coat pocket. She was leaving her life behind, perhaps forever. Silas met them at the garage, his face pale even for a vampire. "The perimeter is breached, my lord," Silas hissed, looking over his shoulder. "The shadows are lengthening in the east garden. Malachi's warlocks are probing the wards." "Hold them as long as you can," Valerius commanded, loading the trunk of a matte black SUV that looked more like a tank than a luxury vehicle. "Then abandon the house. Scatter the staff. Go to ground." "And you?" Silas asked, his voice trembling slightly. "I am taking the high road," Valerius said. He turned to Alara. "Get in the back with Leo. Keep his head down. Do not look out the windows." Alara climbed into the back seat. Leo was already there, buckled in, hugging a stuffed wolf Alara had found under his bed. He was shaking, his eyes squeezed shut. "It's okay," Alara whispered, buckling herself in and pulling the boy against her side. "We're going on a trip. Like a vacation." "It's not a vacation," Leo whispered, his voice hitching. "It's a hunt. And we're the foxes." Valerius slid into the driver's seat. The engine roared to life, a deep, guttural sound that vibrated through the chassis. He didn't turn on the headlights. "Hold on," he warned. The car shot forward, tires screaming against the polished concrete floor. The garage door opened, and they burst out into the night. The world outside was a blur of snow and darkness. A storm had descended, turning the landscape into a white void. Valerius drove with supernatural precision, taking corners at speeds that should have flipped the heavy vehicle. They had made it to the main road, the iron gates of the manor fading into the blizzard behind them, when the attack began. It didn't come with an explosion. It came with silence. The sound of the engine cut out. The wind stopped howling. The world went dead still. "They are here," Valerius said calmly. Suddenly, the windshield went black. Not from paint or mud, but from a living darkness that latched onto the glass. Thick, oily tendrils began to squeeze the car, the metal groaning under immense pressure. "Leo, close your eyes," Alara shouted, pulling the boy's head into her chest. "I can feel them," Leo screamed. "They're cold. They're so cold." Valerius didn't panic. He bit into his own wrist. Blood welled up, dark and rich. He slammed his bleeding wrist against the dashboard. "Sanguis scutum," he roared. A shockwave of crimson light exploded from the dashboard, rippling over the car like a second skin. The darkness on the windshield sizzled and shrieked, burning away in wisps of foul-smelling smoke. The engine roared back to life. Valerius floored the accelerator. The car fishtailed on the ice, then straightened, rocketing forward. "Are they gone?" Alara asked, her heart hammering in her throat so hard she could barely breathe. "No," Valerius said, his eyes fixed on the road, glowing a fierce, predatory violet. "They're following." Alara looked back. Through the rear window, she saw shapes moving in the tree line. They weren't cars. They were wolves, massive, shadow-formed beasts the size of ponies, running alongside the vehicle at 60 miles per hour. Their eyes burned red. "Don't look at them," Valerius commanded. "Alara, focus on Leo. If he panics, his magic will react with the blood shield I just cast. If that happens, the car will explode." "No pressure," Alara muttered, her hands trembling as she smoothed Leo's hair. "Leo," she said, forcing her voice to be steady. "Leo, listen to me. Do you know the story of the tortoise and the hare?" "I don't want a story," Leo sobbed. "I want them to stop running. They're just dogs," Alara lied. "Big, ugly dogs. And we are faster. Now tell me, who wins the race? The fast rabbit or the slow turtle?" "The turtle," Leo sniffled, burying his face deeper into her coat. "Right. Because the turtle is steady." "Be the turtle, Leo. Slow your heart down. Be the turtle." A massive impact shook the car. One of the shadow wolves had lunged at the side door. The metal buckled inward, but the crimson shield held. Valerius swerved, slamming the side of the car into the beast, sending it tumbling into the snowy ditch. "One down," Valerius growled. For the next hour, the drive was a nightmare of ice and adrenaline. Valerius drove like a man possessed, battling the storm and the beasts. Alara sang lullabies, told stories, and whispered reassurances, acting as the human anchor in a supernatural hurricane. Every time Leo's magic started to spike, manifesting as frost on the windows or the sudden wilting of the leather seats, Alara would squeeze his hand, grounding him, pulling him back from the edge. Finally, the road began to climb. The trees grew thicker, the air thinner. The shadow beasts, unable to cross the running water of the mountain river they passed, fell behind, their howls fading into the wind. Valerius slowed the car. The red glow of the shield faded, leaving him looking paler than usual. "We are crossing the threshold," he said, his voice raspy. "We are safe." The safe house was not a cabin, it was a fortress disguised as a lodge. Perched on a cliff edge overlooking a valley of jagged pines, it was built of heavy timber and gray stone. It looked ancient, as if it had grown out of the mountain itself. Valerius parked the car in a hidden alcove. He stepped out, staggering slightly. Alara opened her door, and the biting cold of the mountain air hit her like a slap. She helped Leo out. The boy was exhausted, his eyes drooping, but he was calm. "Did we win?" Leo asked sleepily. "We won the race," Alara smiled, though her legs felt like jelly. They entered the lodge. The interior was freezing, the air stale from disuse. Furniture was covered in white sheets, looking like ghosts in the moonlight filtering through the dusty windows. Valerius moved to the massive stone fireplace. He didn't use matches. He simply waved a hand, and a roaring fire sprang to life, casting long, dancing shadows across the room. "There is food in the cellar." "Preserved," Valerius said, leaning heavily against the mantel. "And wood in the shed." "There is no staff here. No servants. Only us." He turned to look at them. The adrenaline was fading, leaving him looking hollowed out. The wound on his wrist was healing, but slowly. "I must rest," he said. "The blood magic, it takes a toll." "Go," Alara said. "I've got Leo. I'll get us settled." Valerius looked at her, gratitude warring with pride in his eyes. He nodded once, then disappeared down a hallway. Alara was left alone in the middle of a mountain fortress with a vampire prince and a sleeping child. She took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of pine and wood smoke. "Okay," she said to the empty room. "First things first. Dust." 3 days passed in a blur of domestic survival. Alara found that despite the supernatural circumstances, the work was familiar. She swept floors, she cooked simple meals from the canned goods in the cellar, tomato soup and crackers became a staple, and she made up the beds with linens she found in cedar chests. Valerius slept for 2 days straight. On the third afternoon, Alara was in the main room, sitting on the rug in front of the fire with Leo. Outside, the blizzard was still raging, trapping them in a white cocoon of isolation. "Okay, Leo," Alara said, holding up a smooth river stone she had found on the mantel. "Try again. Don't push the energy out. Pull it in. Like you're holding your breath." Leo stared at the stone. "It wants to break," he whispered. "Everything wants to break." "That's entropy," Alara said, using a word Valerius had used. "Things fall apart. But you can hold them together. Just look at the stone. See how strong it is? It's been in a river for 1,000 years. It's not going anywhere." Leo scrunched up his face in concentration. He reached out a finger and touched the stone. Usually, when he touched things while stressed, they crumbled. But this time, the stone stayed solid. It didn't turn to dust. It didn't freeze. "I did it." Leo gasped, his face lighting up with a smile that transformed him from a haunted specter into a normal 7-year-old boy. "You did it," a deep voice said from the shadows. Alara and Leo turned. Valerius was standing in the doorway. He looked better. The gray pallor was gone, replaced by the marble perfection of his skin. He had changed into a thick black sweater and dark trousers, looking less like a king and more like a man. A very dangerous, very attractive man. "Father." Leo scrambled up, running to him. But he stopped a few feet away, the old fear flickering back. I didn't break the stone." Valerius walked forward and knelt on one knee. He looked at the stone in Alara's hand, then at his son. I saw, Valerius said softly. He reached out and placed a hand on Leo's shoulder. You are learning control. Alara taught me, Leo said. She says I have to be the turtle. Valerius looked up at Alara, an eyebrow raised. The turtle. It makes sense in context, Alara said, feeling a blush creep up her neck. She stood up, dusting off her skirt. You're awake. Are you hungry? The double meaning hung in the air. Valerius stood slowly, his eyes locked on hers. I have supplies, he said, gesturing vaguely toward his room. I do not feed on guests. I meant for soup, Alara said quickly. We have plenty of tomato soup. A small smile touched Valerius's lips. It was genuine, reaching his eyes, softening the sharp angles of his face. Soup would be acceptable. That evening, the dynamic in the lodge shifted. They ate at the rough-hewn wooden table. It wasn't the silent, terrified dining of the restaurant, nor the formal, hostile dining of the manor. It was quiet, but companionable. After dinner, Leo fell asleep on the rug in front of the fire, worn out by his magic practice. Alara sat on the sofa, watching the flames. Valerius stood by the window, watching the storm. The storm will break tomorrow, he said. And then? Alara asked. Then Malachi will resume his hunt. Valerius turned to face her. He cannot enter here, the foundations are laid with salt and iron, but he can siege us. He can starve us out. So we're trapped, Alara said. For now. Valerius walked over to the sofa. He hesitated, then sat down on the opposite end. It was the closest they had ever been in a relaxed setting. You have done more for him in 3 days than I have done in 2 years, Valerius said, looking at his sleeping son. I try to teach him to suppress the power, to lock it away. You taught him to make friends with it. He's a child, Alara said. You can't tell a child to stop feeling. You have to teach them what to do with the feelings. Otherwise, they just explode. Is that what happened to you? Valerius asked. His violet eyes were piercing, seeing too much. Alara looked away, into the fire. My father, he wasn't a vampire, but he was a monster in his own way. He liked silence. If I cried, if I laughed too loud, bad things happened. So I learned to be quiet. I learned to hide inside myself. She wrapped her arms around her knees. I see Leo hiding under that table, and I don't see a scion. I see me. I see a kid who thinks their existence is a mistake. The silence stretched, heavy and intimate. You are not a mistake, Alara, Valerius said. His voice was a low rumble, vibrating through the sofa cushions. You are a revelation. He moved closer. He didn't blur or vanish. He moved with human slowness, giving her every chance to pull away. He didn't. Your hand, he said. May I? Alara nodded, her throat dry. Valerius took her hand. He turned it over, tracing the lines of her palm with a cool finger. You are so fragile, he murmured. Your heart beats so fast. A bird against the bars of a cage. Doesn't it exhaust you? Being so mortal. It makes every moment count, Alara whispered. We don't have forever. So we have to make now matter. Valerius stopped tracing her palm. He looked up, his face inches from hers. The scent of him, ozone, rain, and something spicy like clove filled her senses. I have lived for 600 years, Valerius said. I have seen empires rise and burn. I have seen the world change from sword to gunpowder to silicon. And it has all been gray. Until you knelt on that floor. He leaned in. His gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. Alara, he breathed. Alara didn't pull back. She leaned forward, drawn by a gravity she couldn't explain. She wanted to know what the cold felt like. His hand cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing her bottom lip. His head tilted. Suddenly, Valerius stiffened. His eyes snapped wide, the pupils dilating instantly into black pools. He pulled back, hissing in pain, clutching his chest. Valerius. Alara reached for him. What is it? The bond, Valerius gasped, falling off the sofa onto his knees. The blood oath betrayed. What bond? Silas, Valerius choked out. Silas has fallen. Is he dead? No, Valerius looked up, his eyes bleeding crimson, the violet gone. He has turned. He has opened the manor. He has given Malachi the keys to the vault. What vault? Alara asked, terrified by the change in him. The Vault of Shadows. Valerius stood up, swaying. Where we keep the things that should not exist. Ancient artifacts. Cursed objects. He looked at Leo, sleeping innocently on the rug. There is a dagger there, Valerius said, his voice hollow with horror. The blade of ash. It is the only thing that can kill a scion permanently. It severs the soul from the body. Alara scrambled to her feet. Malachi has it? He has it, Valerius said. And he is not coming here to siege us anymore. He is coming to finish it. The fire in the grate suddenly flared green. The wood hissed and popped. They are coming, Valerius said, regaining his composure, the mask of the king sliding back into place. And we cannot run this time. The pass is snowed in. So we fight, Alara said. Her voice shook, but her chin was high. Valerius looked at her. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture so tender it made her heart ache. I fight, he corrected. You survive. That is your duty, Alara. If I fall, you must take him. You must hide him in the human world. Raise him as one of you. Let him forget he was ever a king. Don't talk like that, Alara grabbed his lapels. We do this together. You said I was his anchor. Well, anchors don't float away. Valerius stared at her, and for a moment, the weight of centuries seemed to lift from his shoulders. He leaned down and pressed his forehead against hers. Then be my anchor too, he whispered. He pulled away, his face hard with resolve. Wake the boy, Valerius commanded. Tonight, we turn this hunting lodge into a kill box. The next few hours were a frenzy of preparation, unlike the packing at the manor. This was different. This was preparing for a siege. Valerius moved the heavy oak furniture against the doors and windows. He used his blood to draw complex sigils on the floorboards, traps for the unwary. Alara took Leo into the kitchen. We're going to play a new game, she told him. Her hands were steady now. The fear had burned away, leaving only a cold, hard clarity. It's called Fortress. Are the bad men coming? Leo asked. He was clutching his wolf, but his eyes were dry. Yes, Alara said. But your father is very strong. And you're strong too. She opened the cupboards. I need you to help me make something. She wasn't making a spell. She was making what she knew from her childhood in a rough neighborhood. What is that? Leo asked, watching her mix flour, pepper, and cleaning chemicals into glass jars. Improvised distractions, Alara said grimly. If they get past your father, they have to get past us. And I am not going down without a fight. Valerius entered the kitchen. He saw the jars. He saw the steak knives Alara had lined up on the counter. He saw the fierce determination in her eyes. You are a warrior, he said, sounding surprised. I'm a waitress from the south side, Alara said, tying her hair back. Same thing. A howl pierced the night air. It was closer than before. Much closer. Then a heavy thud against the front door. The wood groaned but held. They are here, Valerius said. He drew the ancient curved sword he had taken from the manor. The blade glowed with a faint, purple light. Stay in the kitchen, Valerius ordered. Do not come out unless I call for you. Or unless I am dead. He turned to leave, then stopped. He looked back at Alara. Alara, he said. Yeah. If we survive this, he said, I am going to kiss you properly. Alara managed a crooked smile. You better. Valerius turned and walked into the darkened living room. The front door exploded inward. Splinters of wood and iron showered the room. Through the gaping hole, the storm blew in. And with it, a dozen figures. Vampires. Their eyes glowing red, their fangs bared. And behind them, walking calmly through the snow, was Lord Malachi. In his hand, he held a dagger made of bone that seemed to drink the light around it. Valerius! Malachi roared, his voice shaking the rafters. Your reign ends tonight. Valerius stood alone in the center of the room, his sword held low. Come and take it, the vampire king whispered. The first vampire lunged. Valerius moved. The battle for the soul of the coven had begun. The sound of the battle in the main hall was not the clang of steel on steel, it was the wet, tearing sound of a hurricane moving through a slaughterhouse. Valerius moved with a fluidity that defied physics. To the human eye, he would have been a blur of charcoal wool and violet light. He spun, his ancient curved sword singing a high, lethal note as it sliced through the air. The first attacker, a brute with filed teeth, lunged. Valerius didn't block. He pivoted, guiding the momentum of the creature past him, severing a hamstring with a surgical flick of his wrist before driving the pommel of his sword into the vampire's temple. The creature crumpled, turning to ash before he hit the floorboards. 1, Valerius counted, his voice calm amidst the chaos. 2 more circled him. They moved in tandem, pack hunters. They were fast, but Valerius was old. He had learned the art of war when these vampires' ancestors were still plowing fields in the mud. He sidestepped a clawed swipe that would have taken his head off, grabbing the attacker's wrist. With a sickening crunch, he twisted the arm, using the screaming vampire as a shield against the second attacker's blade. But there were too many. Malachi stood in the doorway, the storm swirling around him, watching his minions die with a bored expression. He twirled the blade of ash between his thick fingers. The bone dagger pulsed with a necrotic gray light, drinking the warmth from the room. "You look tired, old king," Malachi taunted, his voice booming over the roar of the fire. "That blood shield took a lot out of you, didn't it? Your movements are sluggish." Valerius didn't answer. He was breathing hard. Malachi was right. The drive, the shield, the constant vigilance, it had drained his reserves. He parried a blow that rattled his teeth, the vibration traveling up his arm. He kicked the attacker into the fireplace, the flames roaring as they consumed the undead flesh. "Alara!" Valerius shouted, his voice straining. "Barricade the inner door." "Now!" In the kitchen, Alara heard the command. It was a death knell. If he was telling her to seal them in, it meant he was losing ground. "Help me push the fridge," Alara grunted, shoving her shoulder against the heavy appliance. Leo, his eyes wide with terror but his jaw set in a grim line, pushed alongside her. He was small, but panic gave him strength. Together, they slid the refrigerator in front of the swinging kitchen door, wedging it tight. "Will that stop them?" Leo whispered, clutching his wolf. "It will buy us a minute," Alara said, grabbing her first jar of distraction flour and cayenne pepper. "And a minute is a long time." Crash. The wood of the kitchen door splintered. A fist punched through the panels, then through the metal of the fridge door. Claws scrabbled, tearing at the obstruction. "Back up," Alara ordered, pushing Leo behind the kitchen island. The fridge was heaved aside with a groan of tearing metal. A vampire squeezed through the gap. He was lithe, his face a ruin of scars, his eyes glowing red with bloodlust. He saw Alara and grinned, exposing jagged fangs. "The nursemaid," he hissed, crouching to spring. "And the snack." Alara didn't scream. She didn't freeze. She thought of every shift she'd worked where a customer had grabbed her wrist, every time she'd walked home with keys between her knuckles. She threw the jar. It wasn't a perfect throw, but it was close enough. The jar shattered against the vampire's chest, exploding in a cloud of white flour and red pepper. The vampire roared, clawing at his eyes as the pepper burned into his heightened senses. He sneezed violently, the flour coating his airways. "Now, Leo!" Alara yelled. "The ice." Leo raised a trembling hand. He didn't try to destroy the vampire. He just pictured the water in the air, the moisture in the flour. "Freeze." The cloud of flour and spit instantly hardened into concrete like ice. The vampire choked, gagging as his airway was blocked by a plug of frozen dough. He fell to his knees, clawing at his throat. Alara stepped forward, holding the steak knife. She knew she couldn't kill him. She didn't have the strength to take off a head, but she could slow him down. She drove the knife into the vampire's shoulder, pinning him to the floorboards. He shrieked, lashing out. His backhand caught Alara across the ribs, sending her flying into the cabinets. Pain exploded in her side. She gasped, collapsing to the floor. "Alara!" Leo screamed. The kitchen wall exploded. Not from the door, but from the main hall. A body came flying through the plaster and lath, smashing into the heavy oak table, splitting it in two. It was Valerius. He lay amidst the splintered wood, his chest heaving. His shirt was torn, revealing deep gouges in his marble skin that weren't healing. Dark, viscous blood pooled beneath him. Malachi stepped through the hole in the wall. The other vampires held back, letting their master take the stage. Pathetic, Malachi sneered, kicking Valerius in the ribs. The king groaned, trying to rise, but his limbs failed him. Malachi looked around the kitchen. He saw the vampire choking on the floor. He saw Alara clutching her ribs. And he saw Leo, standing alone by the stove. So this is the monster we fear? Malachi laughed, a wet, ugly sound. A child with a stuffed toy. He walked toward Leo. The blade of ash hummed, a sound like a swarm of dying flies. Run, Leo. Valerius rasped, dragging himself across the floor. Run. Leo didn't run. He couldn't. His back was to the stove. Malachi loomed over the boy. Your father is weak, boy. He let his blood get thin. He let a human tame him. But I will not make the same mistake. I will purge this bloodline and start fresh. He raised the bone dagger. Alara's vision was swimming. Her ribs felt like they were on fire. But she saw the blade go up. She saw the fear in Leo's eyes, not for himself, but for his father. She didn't think. She moved. With a scream of pure, primal effort, she launched herself from the floor. She didn't attack Malachi. She threw herself over Leo. No. Malachi brought the dagger down. It didn't hit flesh. It stopped in midair, inches from Alara's spine. The room went silent. Even the storm outside seemed to hold its breath. Malachi frowned, straining, pushing down with all his vampiric strength. The dagger wouldn't move. It was held by an invisible, immovable force. You, Leo whispered. Malachi looked down. Leo wasn't hiding behind Alara anymore. He had stepped out from her embrace. His hand was raised, his small palm flat against the air, directly under the blade. His eyes were not violet. They were white. Pure, blinding white. You hurt her, Leo said. His voice wasn't a child's voice. It layered, echoing as if 1,000 ancestors were speaking through him. You hurt my father. You hurt my Alara. What is this? Malachi snarled, pushing harder. Die, you abomination. Entropy, Leo said. The word hung in the air, heavy and final. You said I break things. You were right. Leo curled his fingers. The blade of ash, the ancient, indestructible artifact forged in the fires of the underworld, began to scream. Cracks appeared in the bone handle. The gray light flickered and died. No, Malachi gasped, trying to pull the weapon away. He couldn't. He was frozen in place, anchored by the boy's will. Dust, Leo commanded. The dagger exploded. It didn't shatter into shards, it disintegrated into fine, gray powder. Malachi stumbled back, staring at his empty hand in horror. Impossible, he breathed. That blade, it is eternal. Nothing is eternal, Valerius's voice came from the floor. The king had managed to stand. He was swaying, bleeding, but his eyes were burning with a fierce, triumphant light. He looked at his son, then at his enemy. Except, Valerius said, perhaps consequences. Leo looked at Malachi. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked sad. I don't want to hurt you, Leo said. But you won't stop. I am a lord of the council. Malachi roared, his fear turning to desperate rage. He lunged for the boy with his bare hands. I will tear your throat out. Leo didn't flinch. He simply reached out and touched Malachi's chest. It was a gentle touch. Almost like a blessing. Sleep, Leo whispered. The effect was instantaneous. Malachi's momentum stopped. His skin, flush with the blood of his victims, turned gray. His eyes rolled back. He didn't turn to ash. He didn't die. He simply stopped. His heart stopped beating. His lungs stopped drawing air. He fell forward, hitting the floor like a statue toppling from a pedestal. He was alive, but trapped in a stasis so deep it was indistinguishable from death. The remaining minions in the main hall looked at their fallen leader. Then they looked at the boy with the white eyes. They didn't attack. They didn't scream. They turned and ran, fleeing into the storm, terrified of the power they had just witnessed. The silence returned to the lodge. Leo stood over the body of the warlord. His eyes slowly faded from white back to violet. Then, the adrenaline crashed. His knees buckled. Leo. Alara scrambled forward, catching him before he hit the ground. He was limp in her arms, his skin freezing cold. Did I do it right? Leo mumbled, his eyes fluttering. I didn't break the house. Just the knife. You did it perfect, baby, Alara sobbed, rocking him. You were perfect. You were the turtle. You were the strongest turtle in the world. Valerius limped over to them. He dropped to his knees, ignoring his own wounds. He placed a hand on Leo's chest, checking his heart. He is drained, Valerius said, his voice thick with emotion. But he is alive. He is safe. He looked up at Alara. Her face was bruised, her lips split, and she was clutching her side. You, Valerius said. He reached out, his hand trembling, and cupped her face. You threw yourself in front of the blade of ash. It destroys the soul, Alara. There is no afterlife if that blade touches you. You would have been erased. I didn't know that, Alara whispered, leaning into his touch. I just knew he was going to hurt Leo. You are a fool, Valerius said, tears spilling from his ancient eyes. You are a beautiful, reckless, impossible fool. I know, she smiled weakly. Waitresses are stubborn like that. Valerius leaned in. This time, there was no interruption. No glass breaking. No monsters. He kissed her. It wasn't a gentle, tentative kiss. It was a desperate, claiming thing. It tasted of blood and ozone and survival. It was the kiss of a man who had been drowning for centuries and had finally broken the surface. Alara kissed him back, ignoring the pain in her ribs, her hands tangling in his dark hair. In the ruins of the kitchen, surrounded by flour and broken wood and the body of a defeated warlord, they found a moment of perfect, absolute peace. The spring sun hit the terrace of Blackwood Manor, warming the stone that had once felt so cold. The gardens, once gray and manicured within an inch of their life, were now a riot of color. Wildflowers grew between the rosebushes. A wooden swing set had been erected near the fountain. Alara sat on the patio furniture, sipping coffee. She wasn't wearing a uniform. She wasn't wearing the gray wool of a governess. She was wearing a sundress of pale yellow, her hair loose around her shoulders. Silas approached the table. He looked different, too. He wasn't wearing his stiff robes, but a crisp suit. He placed a stack of letters on the table. The correspondence from the Western Coven, my lady, Silas said. His tone was respectful, lacking the sneer of the past. He had learned his lesson well after Valerius had spared his life, demoting him to administrative assistant rather than executor. Thank you, Silas, Alara said. Has Leo finished his lessons? Master Leo is occupied, Silas said, a twitch of a smile appearing on his lips. Alara looked out across the lawn. Leo was by the pond. He was kneeling in the grass. Around him, a dozen butterflies were fluttering in a tight circle. He wasn't controlling them with fear, he was guiding them. He lifted a finger and a blue monarch landed gently on his nail. He looked healthy. His cheeks were pink, his eyes bright. He laughed at something, the sound ringing clear across the garden. Valerius stepped out onto the terrace. He came up behind Alara, placing his hands on her shoulders. He kissed the top of her head. He is happy, Valerius said softly. He is, Alara agreed, reaching up to cover his hand with hers. And the council? Quiet, Valerius said. They are afraid of him. But more importantly, they respect him. He is not the unstable weapon they feared. He is the guardian. And what about Malachi? Still sleeping, Valerius said darkly. In the deepest cell of the dungeon. A reminder to the others of what happens when you threaten my family. He walked around the chair and sat next to her, taking her hand. He played with the simple silver ring on her finger. It wasn't a crown jewels piece, it was a band of white gold etched with a wave pattern. Fire and water. Do you miss it? Valerius asked suddenly. The restaurant? The city? The noise. Alara looked at him. She looked at the ancient vampire who had learned to smile. She looked at the boy in the garden who had learned to trust. She looked at the home she had helped heal. I miss the bagels, Alara admitted with a grin. But no, I don't miss the hiding. Good, Valerius said, lifting her hand to his lips. Because I have no intention of letting you go. I'm not going anywhere, Elara promised. From the garden, Leo waved at them. Elara. Father. Look. The fish are eating the bread. Elara laughed, standing up. Coming, Leo. She pulled Valerius to his feet. The Vampire King, the scourge of the underworld, the ancient predator, let himself be led across the grass by his human wife, toward the sun, toward his son, and toward a future that was no longer written in blood, but in hope. What she didn't know when she knelt under that table was that she wasn't just saving a boy. She was saving a kingdom. And in doing so, she had found her own.